My fellow Americans, let me welcome you to our State of the Onion address. Actually, this is still Cam 60, and we're talking this week about politics. Yes, I know you don't want to hear about it, but here's the truth. Food, along with everything in your life, is political. Every decision you make both influences and is influenced by politics. That's the simple truth. So, in part, when we think about this, we're thinking about kind of the old spiral. So, we've seen, that farmers are squeezed by rising production costs and lower commodity prices because the people who are really paying the bills for most of the farmers are not you and I, but large corporate accounts. They have to sell more, the farmers have to sell more, in order to make the same amount of money. And this is in part because we've shifted from open markets to controlled markets. What is a market? Well, obviously a market is a place where people trade, buy and sell things. And in discussions of politics, we may hear things about the so-called free market. Right? You'll hear people talking about the free market, or the market will regulate things, or leave it up to the free market, that kind of thing. And a free market is supposed to be an economic system in which prices and wages are determined by unrestricted competition between businesses without government regulation. So hands off and everything sorts it out. And that basically doesn't exist. And it shouldn't exist. So where does this idea come from? Well, proponents of the free market, one of their big names they always trot out is a late 18th century or mid to late 18th century Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith. He wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, which is beloved by conservative political thinkers, and he developed the concept of the invisible hand. And the quote that they trot out a lot is that it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. Every individual intends only his own security, only his own gain. And he is in this led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectually than he really intends to promote it. So, in other words, this invisible hand represents all the social good incidentally caused by people pursuing their own self-interest. And it's true. Social benefits of the invisible hand are clearly seen in many cases. A business person who wants to become a millionaire first has to come up with a product that is pleasing or beneficial or desired by thousands of consumers. And so by pursuing their own greed, a millionaire also benefits society. But there are a lot of misconceptions about the invisible hand, starting with the belief that Adam Smith himself was an absolute believer in it. In fact, he was not. He viewed merchants with the greatest suspicion. Another quote from The Wealth of Nations, which is usually not trotted out by the conservative political thinkers, is that he said, "People of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices." So in other words, when people in the same business get together and talk, they make decisions that affect the consumers. Duh, we all know that. In fact, there is really no such thing as a free market. Markets are the creation of governments. How so? Well, first of all, governments provide a stable currency to make markets possible. We know we may barter amongst ourselves to some degree or trade favors with friends, etc. But most of us pay for things with money. Government provides a legal infrastructure and court system to enforce the contracts that make our markets possible. So once we've gone beyond the barter stage and you say, fine, I'll pay you for a service, and we enter into a contract, if I don't pay, then you have recourse because government. They provide an educated workforce through public education, and those workers show up at places of business after traveling on public roads, railways, or airways provided by the government. Businesses that use the quote-unquote free market are protected by police and fire departments that are provided by the government, and send their communications from phone to the internet over lines that follow public rights of way maintained and protected by, yes, the government. When the government sets the rules of the game of business in such a way that working people must receive a living wage, labor has a power to organize into unions, just as capital or money can organize into corporations. And domestic industries are protected from overseas competition by, say, tariffs. Then a middle class will emerge. When the government gives up these functions, the middle class vanishes, and we return to a Dickens-era, quote, normal of totally free market, and the middle class vanishes. The rich get richer, and the working poor get kept in a constant state of fear and anxiety so that the cost of our labor will always be cheap. So probably the only really free markets we've seen in our adult lifetime would be the Miami era after Hurricane Andrew and New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. For a day or two, quote-unquote, entrepreneurs could sell ice or plywood or any other critical item that they could get their hands on for as much as they could get. Then civilian enforcement stepped in via law enforcement, shut them down. Child labor, anybody? The myth of the free market rests on the fact that the government intervention has become so natural a part of our everyday life and beneficial that we don't even see it. We don't notice it anymore. There's no scientific boundary for free market. In fact, economics isn't a science at all. It's a political exercise. Advocates for free market operate under the pretense that their ideological cloak is to pretend that it's not really political, but really some objective economic truth, while other people's politics is political. However, advocates of the free market are just as politically motivated as their opponents. So, child labor, yeah, it didn't used to be that kids didn't work, that there was such a thing as childhood. If you do a quick look, you'll see photographs of child mill workers in this country and in Britain. It wasn't until the government stepped in and made this illegal that things change. So, there's always some kind of government intervention, government regulation, and, we can debate back and forth about how much is beneficial and how much isn't. And, in fact, that's the crux of a lot of our debates about regulation. But the truth is, there is no such thing as this mythical free market. So having said that, one of the political aspects of the food system is farm subsidies, or the farm bills. And so farm subsidies come in a lot of different forms. Direct payments, marketing loans, conservation subsidies, insurance, disaster aid, export subsidies. Low on the list is ag research and statistics, which is too bad. We should be doing more agricultural research as in the public or the government sector, and less in, or maybe not less, in the private sector. We should be concerned more about what we do government-wise rather than what companies are doing. So direct payments, obviously, that's cash subsidies for producers of 10 crops, so, wheat, corn, sorghum, barley, oats, etc. Basically, they subsidize what farmers will earn from a particular crop. So these were added in the 2002 farm laws. Direct payments based on historical measure of farms' acres used for production and aren't related to current production or prices. So they were intended to be transitional, a way to wean farmers from old-fashioned price guarantee programs. So it used to be the government would say, we'll pay a certain amount per bushel of corn regardless of what the market is. But direct payments haven't been reduced over time as originally planned, and in most years, direct payments are the largest source of subsidies to farmers at more than $5 billion annually. So they're decoupled from current production, which makes them less discretionary than other forms of subsidy. But a substantial amount of the payments are made to owners of land that's not even used for farming. The Washington Post estimated that between 2000 and 2006, the USDA handed out $1.3 billion in direct payments to people who don't farm. The newspaper pointed to thousands of acres of land previously used for rice growing that's now suburban housing and other purposes, but the landowners continue to receive federal farm subsidies. So it's direct payments. Marketing programs, price support program that's been part of the farm subsidy system since the New Deal. Originally, it was just a short-term loan program, but today it's composed of large subsidies for paying guaranteed minimum prices for crops. So, marketing loan program encourages overproduction by setting a floor on crop prices and reducing the variability in the market. So, operates same crops as that direct subsidy program. Again, that kind of that big 10. It's in 2002, the Farm Bill was expanded to producers of wool, mohair, honey, dry peas, lentils, and chickpeas. In recent years, payments under this program have ranged from about $1 billion to $7 billion annually. Under the program, farmers take non-recourse loans. In other words, mean they don't have to pay them back. They can default without penalty. In the past, if market prices fell below target levels, farmers kept their loans and forfeited the low-value crops to the government. Taxpayers were stuck paying the loan costs and the costs of storing the crop subsidy. So today, most marketing loan subsidies are in the form of loan deficiency payments, which allow farmers to bypass the loan process and simply receive a subsidy payment. Alternatively, farmers can receive marketing loan gains, and then they can repay their USD loans at preferential rates. So, they don't receive subsidies from the marketing loan program only when crop price is low. They become experts at gaming the system to maximize their subsidies every year. So farmers can lock in high government benefits when seasonal prices are low, then sell their crops when market prices are higher. So the Post again reports that growers reap benefits even in good years, noting that the program has become so ingrained in farmland finances that farmers sometimes wish for market prices to drop so they can capture a larger subsidy. So in '96, the farm law moved away from traditional price guarantees. The 2002 reverse course embraced them with a counter-cyclical program, so which means it provides larger subsidies when the market prices are lower. Also stimulates excess farm production, just like the marketing loan program. USD also gives out conservation grants to the tune of about $3 billion annually. Largest conservation subsidy program is the Conservation Reserve Program, created in 1985 so that millions of acres of farmland would be idle. So farmers are paid not to grow crops, but to cultivate ground cover like grass or trees on retired acres. And so a large share of the land idled under that program is owned by retired farmers. Thus, you don't even have to be a working farmer to get these subsidies. There's a range of other conservation subsidy programs, including the USDA Conservation Security Program, added in 2003. And I need to plug in for a moment, so I will be right back. And we're back. That was quick. We were talking about the conservation, and so then farm insurance programs, both yield and revenue insurance, are available to farmers to protect against bad weather, pests, low market prices. The mission is described as helping farmers manage their business risks through effective market-based management solutions to the tune of about $4 billion. Federal crop insurance is sold and serviced by 16 private insurance companies. Basically, they operate like a cartel, earning excess profits from the high premiums they charge. They get away with that because the government provides large subsidies for insurance premiums, such as farmers only pay about a third of the full cost of the policies. So in other words, you and I pay the rest of that. Cartel-like structure of the current system was made pretty clear in 2005 when, under lobbying pressure from insurance companies, Congress derailed an attempt by a company to offer discount insurance programs or insurance policies to farmers. In 2007, USDA crop insurance programs were criticized at a rare oversight hearing of an agriculture program by a non-agricultural committee in Congress. Chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, Representative Henry Waxman from California, called the USDA insurance a textbook example of waste, fraud, and abuse in federal spending. Over $8 billion in taxpayer funds have been squandered in excess payments to insurers and other middlemen. Over the decades, Congress has repeatedly expanded crop insurance programs in order to reduce farmers' dependence on emergency bailouts. But both insurance subsidies, emergency bailouts have grown in cost. After just about any sort of crop damage, Congress jumps in to declare a quote-unquote disaster, distribute millions of dollars to farmers, whether or not particular farmers actually sustained substantial damage. Again, Washington Post analysis found out that farmers often get paid twice by government, once in subsidized insurance and then again in disaster assistance. The 2008 Farm Bill had a costly new permanent disaster program intended to reduce ad hoc emergency relief bills. And note, products not covered by federal insurance, such as aquaculture, mushrooms, Christmas trees, ginseng, turf grasses, they have a special non-insured crop disaster assistance program. USDA operates a range of programs to aid farmers and food company in foreign sales. So Market Access Program hands out $2 million annually to producers in support of activities such as advertising campaigns. Recipients include the Distilled Spirits Council, the Pet Food Institute, the Association of Brewers, the Popcorn Board, the Wine Institute, and Welch's Food. Another program, Foreign Market Development Program, hands out $35 million annually to groups such as the American Peanut Council, the Cotton Council International, and the Mohair Council of America. Most American industries fund their own research and development programs. The ag industry is a notable exception. USDA spends about $3 billion annually on agriculture research, statistical information services, and economic studies. USDA carries out research in 108 different locations and provides subsidies to 50 states for research and education. Another example, the U.S. comes to dominate the global market for corn. We control 71% of the market. Not because corn is the best crop we could be growing, either for the ecological health of the Midwest or the physical health of us as consumers, since most of it is used for high-fat feedlot meat, high-fructose corn syrup, exports, or ethanol. No, corn's success in those uses was made possible, but in large measure, by U.S. government policies propping up the biggest industrial corn growers with $73.8 billion in subsidies from 1995 to 2009. So if we use ethanol as an example, we give 45% per gallon tax credit. So that's $3 billion a year to industry blending corn-based ethanol. And we impose a 54% per gallon duty on sugar-based ethanol from Brazil and the Caribbean. Even if all corn land became biofuel production, oil consumption would decline by only 13%. 2008 studies showed that greenhouse gas emissions from switching to corn-based fuel would exceed those by burning gasoline. Why? Well, presidential hopefuls first caucus in Iowa, a corn and ethanol producing state, and can't hope to advance without promising subsidies, import protection, and ethanol mandates. So I don't want to make out that, farmers are fat cats and et cetera. I mean, we can look around in Mendocino County and Lake County and know that farming is hard, back-breaking work for many people. The reality, though, is that a lot of the quote-unquote farming in this country is really basically kind of big agribusiness and is not somebody with a couple of acres of land growing food for you and I to eat. So there's kind of a difference there. And those people are very invested in the outcome of the Farm Bill, which until 2013 was a pretty reliable bipartisan effort. right? It comes from the quote-unquote Iron Triangle. So it's the Senate and House Ag Committee, the USDA, and the Farm Lobby. And the bill always had an ag component, a food stamp component, and an environmental component. And so that gave each of the kind of constituents something to grab onto. So the generally the Republican Party is heavy in rural areas, particularly the Midwest. So there's your ag component. The Democratic Party often has strongholds in cities and urban areas, which often is kind of the food stamp component as well as the environmental protection component. 2013, though, House Republicans separated the food stamp component to try to eliminate it while increasing subsidies for the wealthiest farmers. So, I mean, how does this even happen? How does the government make policy? How do we get to where we are? Well, one of the things we have to look at is the revolving door. And so that's the relationship between people in industries and the government agencies that regulate them. It's a direct result of a revolving door. So current Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack has always been a darling of big agriculture, particularly Monsanto. When he was governor of Iowa, he was even chauffeured around in Monsanto's private jet. He's also been a cheerleader for the biotech industry, receiving the Biotechnology Industries Organization Governor of the Year Award in 2001. His tenure at the USDA has reflected just as much. So when we're talking about the relationship between industry and government, in some way we can see why this makes sense. If you go into a particular field or you study something in particular and you're good at what you do, you're going to meet other like-minded people. So, for instance, those of us in the food or the restaurant business, we know other cooks, we know other managers, we know other people, and when it comes time to hire somebody, are we going to hire people that we know and that we've worked with and that we trust, who, share our way of thinking? Yeah, probably so. Is somebody going to get a leg up by knowing us rather than by not knowing us? Yeah, probably so. So why would any other component, any other employer be different, right? It's a little trickier though when we come to the government. So, if you've been in government and you know lawmakers and you have access to them and their staff, and then you retire from government service and somebody in an industry that you used to be involved in regulating in offers you a job for a substantial amount of money, hey, you have a family to support, or, maybe you just want to take care of yourself, whatever it is, yeah, you're probably going to take that job. And you're probably going to use your influence to further your company's interest with your friends that used to be in the Capitol. Conversely, if you are a rising star in one of these companies and you get yourself appointed to some kind of government committee, or you're tapped to be the Secretary of Agriculture, are you in a powerful position? Can you get things done? Yes. Will you get paid for that? Maybe not directly, right? The problem here is that government work doesn't really pay that well at those high levels. People can make far more money in the private industry, private world, than they can working in government. So the temptation to leave public service for private work is great. So why would anybody go into government service at that level? Well, do a couple years of government service, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever. Take a little bit of a pay cut that you can maybe supplement in some other ways, and then get a big payoff when you get out. Yeah, probably going to be that way. And so what happens though when those relationships exist? So we get situations like Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice. Before he was making headlines at his confirmation hearings, he was quietly serving as an attorney for Monsanto, where he was employed in the late 1970s. And so despite this fact, he doesn't see the need to recuse himself from any Supreme Court cases against his former employer. And unsurprisingly, every vote where Monsanto has been a part of the Supreme Court, Justice Thomas has cast his lot with them. So, we do a little digging, you'll see that relationships exist, a revolving door, into government, out into private sector, maybe back into government, out into private sector. And that affects you and I. It affects the whole world, really, because part of our conversation is how are we going to feed everybody? Okay? There are those who say hunger is not caused by a shortage of food and cannot be eliminated by producing more, right? So, have to do a little history maybe on the Green Revolution. Some of you may have heard of this. For those of you who haven't, the Green Revolution myth goes like this. Miracle seeds of the Green Revolution increase grain yields and therefore are key to ending world hunger. So the Green Revolution was in the late 1970s. We, around the globe, brought different crop varieties and introduced them into the so-called developing or third world. Okay, had them grow different crops, higher yields, introduce more pesticide use, controlled management, etc., etc. So, the myth, higher yields mean more income for poor farmers, helping them climb out of poverty, and more food means less hunger. Dealing with the root causes of poverty that contribute to hunger takes a very long time, and people are starving now. So we got to do what we can to increase production. So feed the people rather than help them get out of poverty. Green Revolution buys the time that the third world countries desperately need to deal with the underlying social causes of poverty and to cut birth rates. So in any case, outsiders like the scientists and policy advisors behind the Green Revolution can't tell a poor country to reform its economic and political system, but we can contribute invaluable expertise in food production, so make more food. So while the first Green Revolution may have missed poor areas with more marginal lands, we can learn valuable lessons from that experience to help launch a second Green Revolution to help defeat world hunger once and for all. So the 1970s revolution was well-deserved. New seeds accompanied by chemical fertilizers, pesticides, for the most part, irrigation had replaced traditional farming practices of millions of third world farmers. By the 1990s, almost 75% of Asian rice areas were sown with these new varieties. The same was true for almost half the wheat planted in Africa, and more than half of that in Latin America and Asia, and about 75% of the world's corn as well. Overall, it was estimated that 40% of all farmers in the third world were using Green Revolution seeds, with the greatest use found in Asia, followed by Latin America. So clearly, production advances of the Green Revolution are no myth. That's for sure. We did increase yields. Thanks to new seeds, tens of millions of extra tons of grain a year are being harvested. But has it proven a successful strategy for ending hunger? Not really. Yes, it did save a number of people. I'm not going to deny that. But even the World Bank concluded in a major 1986 study of world hunger that a rapid increase in food production doesn't necessarily result in less hunger. Right? Current hunger can only be alleviated by quote-unquote redistributing purchasing power and resources toward those who are undernourished, unquote. In other words, if the poor don't have money to buy food, increased production isn't going to help them. This raises serious questions about the number of hungry people in the world in 1970 versus 1990, spanning 2 decades of the major Green Revolution advances. At first glance, it looks like great progress was made. Food production up, hunger down. Total food available per person in the world rose by 11% over those 2 decades. while the estimated number of hungry people fell from 942 million to 786 million, at the 16% drop. It's just apparent progress for anybody, for people behind the Green Revolution. They're very happy, and understandably so, to take credit. But those figures might not tell the whole story. So if we take a look at China, if we eliminate China from that analysis, the number of hungry people in the rest of the world actually increased by more than 11%, from 536 to 597 million. So in South America, for example, per capita food supplies rose almost 8%. The number of hungry people also went up by 19%. In South Asia, there was a 9% more food per person by 1990, but there were also 9% more hungry people. Nor was it increased population that made for more hungry people. The total food available per person actually increased. What made possible greater hunger was the failure to address unequal access to food and food-producing resources. So what happened in China? The remarkable difference in China, where the number of hungry people dropped from 406 million to 189 million. What's been more effective in reducing hunger, the Green Revolution or the Chinese Revolution, where broad-based changes in access to land paved the way for rising living standards? I'm not endorsing the Chinese Revolution here at all, so don't get me wrong. There were a lot of terrible things that happened as a result of that. With the Green Revolution, though, farming becomes petroleum-based, petro-dependent. Some of the more recently developed seeds may produce higher yields without manufactured inputs, but the best results require chemical fertilizer, pesticides, water. And so as the new seeds spread, petrochemicals became part of farming. On the path of industrial agriculture, farming costs more. Could be more profitable, of course, but only if the prices farmers get for the crops stay ahead of the costs of the machinery and the petrochemicals. So the final analysis, if the history of the Green Revolution has taught us anything, it's that increased food production can, and often does, go hand in hand with greater hunger. If the basis of staying competitive in farming is buying expensive inputs, then wealthier farmers will definitely win out over the poor, who are unlikely to find adequate employment to make enough money to afford the food. So in a nutshell, like the World Bank said, redistribute purchasing power and resources towards those who are undernourished. So, who are those undernourished? Well, they're all around us. Now, we do try to alleviate that in some regards with what used to be called food stamps when I was on them, when I was a child and my family used food assistance. Now they call it SNAP. The use is at a record high, nearly 48 million people. It'd be a lot more, but only 67% of the people eligible actually apply. So who are these people? Well, almost half of them are children, 48%. In fact, 49% of all children will receive some type of food assistance benefits sometime before they're 20 years old. 8% are seniors, 93% are below the poverty line, 40% are in households where at least one adult has a job, the working poor. We think of these, you hear about maybe the welfare queens, and again, this gets painted as some kind of a racial issue often, right? Although now the code word for African Americans would be urban, right? We no longer use those divisive words in our politics. Truth is, almost 37% are white, 22% are black, 9.5% Hispanic, 3.3% Native American, 2.4% Asian. There's an 18% that's unknown. So there could be other race-based kind of things in here. But the truth is, it's people it's people all around us. It's all of us. One or more of the people in class may be on some kind of food assistance or have received some kind of food assistance in their life. I know I have. So, advocates of local foods, we find ourselves sometimes in an awkward position of, at the same time, wanting more and less regulation. We want regulation on larger corporate entities, but less on smaller entities. And I'm not sure that there's really, good ways to necessarily make that happen. One thing is for sure that is true. Whoever controls food policy ends up ultimately having control over us because we have to eat. There are a few things in this life that we have to do: eating, drinking water, sleeping, those we have to do. So if you can control the food supply, you can control the population. To that end, some communities, some nations, some other people are proclaiming food sovereignty, and in particular Sedgwick, Maine, done what no other town in the U.S. has done. The town unanimously passed an ordinance giving its citizens the right to produce, process, sell, purchase, and consume local foods of their choosing. This includes raw milk, locally slaughtered meats, just about anything else you can imagine. It's also a decided bucking of state and federal law. In that ordinance, it also says it shall be unlawful for any law or regulation adopted by the state or federal government to interfere with the rights recognized by this ordinance. So, in other words, no state licensing requirements prohibiting certain farms from selling dairy products or producing their own chickens for sale to other citizens in the town. What about food safety? What about our potential legal liability? State and federal inspections. Their law says it's all up to the seller and buyer to negotiate. So patrons purchasing food for home consumption may enter into private agreements with those producers or processors of local foods to waive any liability for the consumption of that food. Producers or processors of local food shall be exempt from licensure and inspection requirements for that food as long as those agreements are in effect. Imagine that. Buyer and seller can agree to cut out the lawyers. So how do we have it both ways? I'm not clear that we can. We know we need some form of regulation, right? We have lagoons of hog waste from gigantic pork producing operations that are basically toxic waste dumps. Now, left to their own devices, a corporation's not going to do anything with those because it cuts into profits. At the same time, we have a situation where it's more expensive for us to buy local meat because of the regulations imposed that smaller producers can't keep up with. So how do we level the playing field? I'm not sure that we can without being, to some degree, hypocritical. Right? So, I think we're probably all hypocrites to one degree or another in various aspects of our lives, but it's not clear to me, at any rate, how do we reconcile that unless there's some provision for maybe economies of scale where, producers under certain amounts of dollars or market value are exempt from certain regulations, or that people can waive their individual rights to sue or to seek compensation. I don't know. It's a thorny issue and not one that I've got readily available answers to, but maybe we will be discussing that. Sorry for that gap. We will be discussing that in our discussion forum.